Hello there, welcome to the Leggett International Real Estate Webinar for this, the 27th of June. I trust you well. My name is Andy Davies. I'm your host for the next hour, and along with me, we have a fantastic panel of experts who will hopefully guide you and help you in your choice of, say, a holiday home or a permanent home here in France. What we do is we say hello to the panelists. They give us a brief description of who they are and what they do, and then we go straight on to the questions. You've submitted some questions, but if you do have a question and you're burning to ask it, there is a box on your sort of screen where you can ask a question. And if I can get to it, I will do my best. But we do have a number that have already been submitted in advance, and I obviously will get to those first. But if there's something that's pertinent to the one I've asked, I will do my best to ask it. Let's meet the panelists first. We always have Joanna Leggett, so we'll start with Joanna. Hello, Joanna.
Hi, Andy. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Joanna Leggett, part of the Leggett family from Leggett Immobilier. We've been in France now for over 20 years. We cover the whole of France. We've got agents that live and work in all their areas. So hopefully we'll be able to help you with any agent questions or any area questions or buying process questions tonight. And thanks for coming along.
Hey, thank you. Let's say hello to Thomas, to my left on the screen.
Thank you, Andy. Good evening, everybody. My name is Tom Marin. I'm one of the partners at Blevins Franks, based in the south of France. We provide strategic tax and financial planning advice for people who are thinking about moving to France. Often we meet people just before they're thinking of making the move, and we help them to assess whether French tax residency is going to work for them. We help them to reorganize their situation to be as tax efficient as possible for French tax. We've been going for 45 years. We're not a new company. I myself have been at the company for just approaching 8 years, and I'm based here in sunny Béziers. I spend a lot of time as well around our Nice office, so I'm back and forth across the south of France.
Thank you, Thomas. This sailor Tracy, who's sweltering in 30-degree heat, she's told us already.
Hi, yes, hi everybody. My name is Tracy Leonetti. I'm a relocation expert and yes, based in the south of France where we're all sweltering away at the moment. Not that I'm complaining. And yes, so I've been here for 30 years. I created LBS over 10 years ago when I realized that the paperwork process to come to France were very, very complicated. So LBS was created ready to help people like yourself who are moving, living, or creating a business in France so that we can help you with the smooth transition with your paperwork.
Thank you, Tracy. And to Tracy's right on my screen is Charles.
Hello, bonsoir everybody. I am Charles Cramail. I am in charge of Leggett Property Management. At Leggett Property Management, we help second homeowners in France to look after their property and earn some money with it as well, because we take care of all the short-term rental management of their second home. We at the moment have 45 property managers all across France, and we look after 160 properties. And it's going great. The season has started already a couple of months ago, and it's booming at the moment. And yes, that's what we do at Leggett Property Management.
Thank you, Charles. And finally, last but not least, is Jonathan Watson.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jonathan. I'm Associate Director at Lumon. So we specialise in international payments. We call ourselves International Property Currency Experts. And tonight we're going to give you some really good information with our team. It's a very interesting time in the currency markets. Of course, the pound's up at some very interesting levels against the euro, and lots of other interesting developments going on in the FX market. So what we like to do at this time is just to launch some polls, just to find out a little bit more about where some of the people launching this webinar are viewing and what they're looking to do in terms of any transactions in the future, particularly timing. This is a very important aspect when you're looking at buying an overseas property. Of course, these things don't happen overnight. So a number of considerations to look at, and certainly the timing aspects of when you're starting to look at property can have a big impact on some of the considerations you'll need to consider. So you should see a poll on your screen at the moment. Thank you very much, everyone who's voting at the moment. Just a bit of information for us to gather to help us give you some really relevant information this evening. So I'm just going to close that particular poll and just launch another one. Again, more to do with the sort of financial aspects of things, particularly for the parts I'm concerned with, the currency element. The rates are changing all the time. One of the biggest problems buying overseas property is you don't really know what it's going to cost you until you've looked at the currency element and looked at some of the options you might have to lock in at levels. The movement on rates over the period of months that you could be looking at purchasing property in France can equate to thousands in terms of difference in what you potentially have to spend. So getting a handle on your costs, getting an understanding what the market's doing is really, really important. So thank you everyone who's answered those polls, really good responses there. I'm going to hand back to Andy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. As I say, just reiterate, if you do have a burning question you'd like to ask it, there is a question box on your screen. And as I say, I'll do my best to ask them. Let's start with Joanna, as we introduce Joanna first. Joanna, obviously the world at the moment is in a slight fluctuation in terms of property, etc. And there's a number of questions regarding the state of the French property market. There's a lady called, and I hope I get her name right, Clementine Segethi Gehula, who says, is the property market in France cooling at present, especially due to inflationary pressures? And then Ewan follows that by saying, if it is cooling, will there be more room for negotiation on price? Your microphone, Joanna.
Myself back on. Yeah, unfortunately, what's been happening in the property markets over the last 2 years with COVID and the low interest rates, everything was getting sold. So what's happened now is there's much less stock on the market, and when there's less stock, it means that it is a vendor's market, not necessarily a buyer's market. So you know, properties are coming on the market, and where they might take 6 months to sell are taking, you know, a week or 2 weeks to sell, and where we might just have one buyer on a property, we may have 2 or 3 offers. So at the moment, it probably will start slowing down towards the end of the year because the interest rates are going up, which means that the French domestic market won't move so much. That doesn't mean the international market's going to stop. It just means that the domestic market will slow down a bit. But we're not expecting, all we've seen so far is price increases. We haven't seen prices coming down, and it's unlikely for them to come down when we're in a market with lack of stock, you know, where things are selling very, very quickly.
Okay, thank you. I've just realised that we didn't introduce Paulette because she wasn't there, but Paulette has joined us. So Paulette, we should say hello to you, and if you introduce yourself, and then we'll carry on with the questions. Hello, Paulette.
Hi, sorry, a few technical difficulties joining. So I'm Paulette Booth, the co-founder and manager of Agence AXA International. We're a dedicated English-speaking agency covering the whole of France. Most of the staff are native English speakers, and if not, very fluent in English, just to help with all banking and insurance needs.
Thank you. So just go back to what Joanna said. So Clementine and Ewan, it looks like that the market isn't cooling because obviously, as Joanna said, there is less stock available. So there is more demand for those properties because people are looking and can't find as many options. So they're prepared to perhaps fight over less properties that are available, if that makes any sense. That was terribly spoken by me, but I think you understand what Joanna said. Let's go to Thomas. Thomas, Andrew Waney says, I bought a secondary residence in France in 1967. What taxes apply on sale or inheriting?
Okay, 1967, it seems like a long time ago. I think that was the year that the Beatles released Sgt. Pepper. So there's 2 potential layers of tax to look at here. There's French capital gains tax and there's UK capital gains tax. So now the good news is, from the French perspective, the French have a system where if you've owned a property for a certain number of years, there's a sliding scale which reduces the effective tax rate. So once you've owned a French property for more than 22 years, there's no tax, no capital gains tax. And once you've owned it for more than 30 years, there's no social charge liability. So in this situation, if we're talking about 1967, that's well over 30 years ago, there would be no French liability to tax or social charges. However, I'm assuming if the person asking the question is saying it's a secondary residence, I'm making the assumption that they are a UK resident. in which case the sale would be assessed for UK capital gains tax, and that would be at either 18% or 28%, depending on what bracket of tax they're in. One potential solution in this case to ensure that there is zero tax would be to move to France, because if you have a French property and it becomes your main home and then you sell it, there is never any liability to French tax in that situation. And also, if you're not a UK resident, then there's no liability to UK capital gains tax. So that's one way of looking at it. I think you asked as well about the implications on inheritance. So if you have a second home in France, you're living in the UK, the asset is based in France, so the French again have the first rights of taxation, and it would be subject to French succession tax. Also, it would be subject to, or at least assessed for, UK inheritance tax. What we often find is that the UK inheritance tax liability, depending on the overall value of the estate, could be higher. So in that kind of situation, again, it might be interesting for that person to move to France, because if they move to France, then potentially there's no UK inheritance tax liability. And this is the kind of thing that we help with our services. You know, we help people assess what the potential tax liabilities would be on either side of the channel, and then you know, help them make an informed decision about it.
Thank you, Thomas. Rosemary Wildsmith Cromarty, I see you've come up on our questions. I'm just about to ask a question you submitted in advance, Rosemary, so it's good that you just popped up on my question box. This is for you, Tracy. Rosemary says, does one have to have a property already before one can, sorry, let me do that again. Does one have to have a property already before one can apply for a carte de séjour? And I'd probably best if you probably quickly explain what a carte de séjour is. And then, as I say, do you have to have a property to be able to apply for a carte de séjour?
Well, certainly, yeah, for the vocabulary side of things, if you're living in the UK or another country and coming into France, then you have to apply for a visa. The visa is what brings you into the country. And then once you are in the country, the carte de séjour or the residency card is what you apply for once you're in the country. So effectively, if you want to come into France, if you're currently living in the UK or another country, it's not a carte de séjour you'll be applying for. First of all, it'll be a visa you'll be applying for to come into the country. Do you have to have a property? You have to have an address. So how that works out could be in a few different scenarios. For example, you could be coming to France and you've found a property to buy already, and therefore you've made an offer, you've got the complément de vente, so you're buying a property, and the complément de vente could be the address you are using for your visa application. You could be renting, doing a long-term rental, so that would give you an address as well. You could be hosted at a friend's house or family, and that could be subject to the address. So you would do something called an attestation d'hébergement, whereby the host will provide a document, their ID and utility bills, to say you are living with them. So do you have to have a property? Not necessarily, but you have to have an address. So it doesn't mean you have to buy a property to come to France, but you do have to have an address. And an Airbnb will not wash it. So some people come to me during consultations, say, oh, we've booked an Airbnb for 6 weeks to come to France while we look for our property. That's what we're using for our visa application. That won't work because it's temporary. It doesn't cover your time frame if you're applying for a visa to come to live in France. Permanently, you need to have an address, which is certainly 6 months minimum or a 6-month renewable rental agreement. Does that kind of answer your question? I hope so, anyway.
It does. I mean, Rosemary's asked a few more, but obviously I've got others to get to. So, Rosemary, I hope that helps. Just to say to Claire Hibberts, who's just come up saying, is this webinar being recorded? Yes, Claire, it is. It's being recorded as we speak, and it will be available as of tomorrow. So you can go back and check the answers that have been given. Charles, this has come from Robin Self, and I'm convinced that you may have submitted this question, but it is a genuine question from Robin. Are there any restrictions in renting out one's house in France? And is it possible to find a good management agent?
Okay, so first I'll answer the second question first. Yes, of course. It's possible to find a good agent, like everything, like a good estate agent, or it is definitely possible. People just need to be careful with whether people are insured, licensed, and that they or registered as a rental management company. That's the most important. that they are allowed to hold money and deposit on behalf of the owner. That's the most important bit. Now, are there restrictions? Yes, of course. We are in France. I mean, it's not a cliche. It's not only a cliche. Things are not that easy, especially in today's sort of atmosphere with the politics. Because it's difficult, as you said, Joanna, for French the domestic market, French people to buy a house because it's difficult to get money, to get a loan, then people rent. And then when people rent, because they cannot buy, then the market is very tight, very tense. And then it means that we don't have enough property on the market to rent. And the first people that we will point and blame are the people who do short-term rental, because they are stealing homes, basically. Now, that's also a reason why it's regulated, which is good. And there are rules that people need to respect. It would take me a long time to give all the rules, but it depends on the categorization of the property, whether it's a primary residence, a second home, or a non-residential home, which is dedicated to rent, for example. Then different rules will apply. The 120 days rule, for example, you can only rent your primary residence if for 120 days a year. If you want to rent it out for short-term rental, then that's another story. For long-term rental, if you want to rent a non-residential home, it could take a long time to give you all the different rules. But then also what needs to be taken into consideration is where the property is. If it's in Paris, for example, in central Paris, there are very, very strict rules about and like regulations about putting a property on Airbnb, for example, which is the most common way to do it. In Bordeaux as well, in Lyon as well, in Marseille as well. And now not only cities, but also areas, territories will start applying these rules. So the best way, the best idea when you consider doing short-term rental, either you go to a rental agent like us, and then they will tell you where you are, what rules will apply depending on your status, also about the taxes as well, which is another subject, isn't it, Thomas? Then there is also the Office du Tourisme, or the mairie, that can help you know all the rules that are applying in your area. So those will be the two first steps that I would say. So yes, you can find good agent. They can help you to have more precise answers to that question, or you can go to the mairie directly or the Office du Tourisme, because they might sometimes know more than the mairie themselves. There you go.
Thanks, Charles. As you can see, there are everyone's details on there. So Charles's email is there, and also Tracy's email is there. So probably if you are looking about possibly buying a home to then rent out, and you want a management agent, obviously you can talk to Charles about that. And if there is, you want questions about what you can do with that property in terms of the restrictions, etc., that would be worth asking those. They are available on email, so you can ask them those questions. Thank you, Charles. Let's go to Paulette. Christine Kyprios says, Paulette, can you explain the healthcare system as a retiree from the UK in the first 3 months?
Okay, so retiree from the UK, that very much depends if you're at UK state retirement age or you're just an early retiree. The important document is what's called an S1. So once you've reached UK retirement age, you'll get a document called an S1, which you can then, with France, that gives you reciprocal rights to healthcare. So that's great. You'll arrive, you're entitled to healthcare straight away. You can register for your social security number in France. However, you're not going to get the number the day that you register. It's going to take 3 to 12 months to get the number. 3 months being quite optimistic. So whilst, yes, you are eligible, And every time you go and have treatment, you'll be given a brown form, as all the Brits call it, the brown form, because it's much easier to say than the French version. You can then collect all of those, and once you've got your number, you can send them off and you get a refund, and that's great. However, you need to consider, say for example, you have emergency hospital treatment. That can be quite a lot of money to have to pay upfront before you've got your social security number. So we do very much recommend taking an insurance just to cover emergencies and just for the first few months of when you're over. And you need to also remember, yes, you've got your S1, which is reciprocal medical treatment in France. That doesn't entitle you to 100% like you would get in the UK, as in you don't pay for anything. It just means you've got the same rights as a French national, and healthcare in France isn't free at point of access. Yes, you will get refunded by Social Security, and if you take eventually a mutual top-up, you'll get a portion of that back, or maybe all of it back, but it's not free at point of access like it is in the UK.
Okay, thank you, Paulette. Jonathan, again, as I said to Charles, I'm convinced that you probably submitted this question, but it isn't. It's a genuine one that came from Gregory Rothweiler. He says, what are the best options to convert US dollars to euros?
Okay, thank you. So, well, there's a number of different options. In terms of Lumon and what we can offer, a range of different ways to move your money around. I think it's really helpful to compare it to using the banks. If you're looking at buying a property in France and you're moving dollars, or in fact any other currency, I've got a bit of visibility here on other questions. This is someone from Denmark. We deal with clients in Australia, New Zealand, obviously the States, the UK, and actually some of the points I'm going to make now will apply to anyone in some of these countries. So using the bank to move your money around, you're really forced to accept the rates on the days or the week, perhaps, where the notaires ask for the money. Now, that can be anywhere from 2, 3, maybe 4 months, potentially longer in some cases. So with currency rates moving many cents most months, trying to get the timing right is very difficult. It's trying to understand your costs. So the options that Lumon can offer any clients moving money from those currencies into euros is really to help you lock in a price. Now, there's different approaches with this. Some clients will be a bit more cautious. They want to understand their budgets up front. So as an example, you might purchase all of the money for your purchase quite early on in the process. So you've locked down your costs, and what we have is a wallet. So as soon as you register with us, you've got access to a euro wallet, a wallet in whatever currency you're selling to buy euros, and you can just hold funds here with us in, say, your chosen currency, in this example, dollars, and just wait for the right moment, purchase the euros, potentially at an opportune time, and we'll guide you through that. What I've got here is some real gold dust. It's our Euro USD intelligence reports. We have a big research team that looks at all the latest news in the FX markets. We survey about 50 different banks. You can get some of this information in the business news, doing your Google searches of currency forecasts, but it's never going to be as comprehensive as the type of research that we can undertake. Now, there's never any guarantees with this, but certainly we can give you the market forecast to try and help you make an informed decision. So you can lock in a rate when you want to, as I say, over that 3-ish month period, lots of potential for rates to be moving up and down. And in terms of your options, you can lock in a rate with us when it suits you. So I think I said in my first points that I made, you don't understand the full cost of a property purchase until you purchase the currency. And we give you a lot of different ways that you can lock in a rate to give you that peace of mind and certainty.
Okay, just quickly, Jonathan, because obviously I've got other questions to do, but Sally Morgan has just come up saying, why would I use a currency exchange company? We've answered this before, but again, why would I use a currency exchange company rather than a bank?
Sure, I mean, 2 main points I'd make. Number one, exchange rates, so we can demonstrate competitive rates versus the banks. We do almost like a mystery shopper every so often, comparing our rates versus what a lot of the banks out there are offering. And the difference can be, you know, a few cents here or there. There's no sort of one rate for each bank. You know, there's different types of accounts, different rates that are achievable. I think the point to make is we have a lot of flexibility and control. Last year, we turned over about 5 billion euros. So as a company, we've got a very strong buying power in the market, and that allows us to operate at a more competitive level to get clients at better rates than, as I say, typically what the banks might be offering. So that's reason number one. The second point I'd make just really ties in what I've already mentioned about this wallet. It's about the control of when you buy a currency. If you don't have all the funds available, then you've got the option of a forward contract where you can lock in a price and settle in a future date. You might be selling a property, you might be waiting for some investments to mature, so you can use one of these contracts to lock in your rate earlier on, and again, you're getting that peace of mind and certainty over costs. I mean, if you just look at some of the movements we've had on currency, you know, since October last year, pound euro levels have moved about 10-11 cents. Euro dollar, it's the best part of 15 cents. When you're talking about large six-figure sums, you know, maybe sub 100,000 euros, in excess of 500,000 euros, up to $1 million, you know, typical cost here of property, those differences in cents are tens of thousands in some cases, you know. So really understanding your costs and just getting a handle on it, or at the very least speaking to a specialist like ourselves, it's, well, I think most people would be a sensible way to go, just to explore those options. We've been trading since the year 2000. We've helped literally tens of thousands of people buying property overseas. So yeah, anyone watching, if you'd like a bit more information about all of this, get your hands on some of this gold dust, and you just need to register. You can have a chat with our team, and we'll give you lots of information.
Thank you, Jonathan. I hope that helps, Sally. Joanna, let's go back to you. Caroline Shelley says, can you advise who we can communicate with? And she's said one agent to help arrange viewings during their visit to France in July.
Yeah, sure. We actually have an in-house call centre and sales support team at head office. So what that means is you can contact us at the info@leggett.fr email address, or telephone our head office, and then depending on what area you're looking at, so say for example you were looking at the Poitou-Charentes or the Dordogne, there would be a person in the sales support team that would be allocated to you. What that person would do would be to take all your criteria, find out exactly the type of property you're looking for, what your needs are, do you need to be near a school, hospital, that type of thing. And then what they would do, that one person would send out an email to all the agents in that area, our agents, of course, Leggett agents. They would then send in suggestions of properties, links to the website, to the person from sales support. And then the sales support person would get back in touch with the client, or the lady in this case, and then they could make a short list of the properties that they actually wanted to see. And then our sales support person would then make all the appointments, set up the itinerary, because they would know how what the distance is between properties, you know, because everyone does sometimes forget France is huge, and although, you know, there might be both the properties are in the Dordogne, they might be 2.5 hours apart. So they would organise all of that, set up an itinerary, get meeting points, get the agents to get in touch with the client, but it would all be done for you, so you wouldn't have to actually organise that yourself. The whole plan would be put together by our sales support team in conjunction with the local agents in the area.
Just on that, Joanna, so Caroline said she's visiting in France in July, so that's imminent. Can you, if you were looking, is there a thing that, is it called a mandat de recherche? Is that where you can ask Leggett to look for property? Perhaps you're looking in November, December time. Can they look for you?
Yeah, a mandat de research is, sorry, I've got a really bad cough today. A mandat de research is slightly different. What that means is it's an agent. So you'd sign a mandat de research, and then that agent would be able to show you any properties, whether they were private sales, whether they were on with another agency, obviously, God forbid, you know, and not Leggett, but if they were on with another agency or any other partner agents that we work with, it means that that one agent has a mandat de research, which means that they can go and speak to anybody, whether it's a private sale, a private client, a private vendor, etc., and they would be able to show you those properties. And basically what that means is that they have the right to show you the property. So mandat research is a really good idea, particularly if you're looking at lots of areas, you know, or you've been on the Leggett site perhaps and you haven't found anything that you're looking for. So with a mandate to research, it means that that agent can go to other agencies and to private sales and do the search for you, and then send you the links and arrange those appointments.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Thomas, Christian Hess says, can you advise what to look out for before moving one's tax base from the UK to France?
Yeah, I think it's certainly important where possible to plan in advance. I mean, we encounter quite a lot of people who move to France without really doing any kind of planning or research, and they arrive in France and they walk into a tax liability that they could have easily avoided if they'd just taken a bit of time to look at their planning, you know, and their tax situation. I think one of the things I would suggest that people do before moving to France is look at their situation in terms of UK investments. A lot of the investment structures that are used in the UK, such as ISAs, unit trusts, general investment accounts, EISs, VCTs, these are all really good for UK investors. They work very well with the UK tax system, but I'm afraid to say that they don't work well at all with the French tax system. There is an opportunity before you move to France to sell those type of investments, potentially without any liability to tax, whereas if you do it after you move to France, then potentially you're paying a lot more in tax. So that's one thing to consider. And then there are various different investment structures that you can use to replace those investments here in France. Another thing that you might be worth considering is UK pensions. If anybody has got UK private pensions, they may be aware that there's a 25% element of that pension fund that you can take as a UK tax resident tax-free. Now, unfortunately, if you move to France without having done that, and then you try to take 25%, that 25% is fully subject to the French scale rates of tax. So if it's a particularly large pension fund, then potentially you could be paying up to 45% tax on withdrawing, a quarter of your pension fund. So again, if you're able to look at that before you move to France, that could be beneficial. Selling property, I think, is a big one as well. The good thing about selling a property in the UK prior to moving to France is that if it's your main home and has always been your main home, then you're not going to pay any capital gains tax on it. The situation is a bit more complex once you move to France. You get a 1-year window in which to sell your previous UK main home tax-free. But if you go one day outside of that window, then it's fully accessible to French capital gains tax. So there is an argument to be on the safe side to dispose of any UK property that you're thinking of selling before you make the move to France. I think the key, message I would give to people is that, if you approach us early, if you approach Blevins Franks, then we can look at your situation, we can spot these potential tax planning opportunities, and we're in a position where we can look at your situation and look at any allowances, tax-free allowances that you might not have utilised, and really that's the best way to do it.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Let's go to you, Tracy. We obviously get lots of questions about the visa situation post-Brexit, and there are a number of questions regarding the 90-day visa. This one came in from Mark Cooper, and those of you watching, I hope this will help, or Tracy's answer will help in your sort of the dilemma about visas. Mark says, are there alternative ways of extending the 90-day visa restriction on living in France?
Yes, Brexit came round. It was a shock to everybody. And it has caused a lot of frustration for people who want to move to France, that's for sure. And it certainly is, as part of a residency and relocation planning meeting, we'll go from A to Z with you through the things you encounter, visas being one of them, but not only, there's lots of other processes you need to go through when coming to France. But certainly for this particular question, the 9180 is a big problem, because a lot of people may come to France on the 9180 rule and thinking they can come to France and then just stay longer and apply for a residency card in France. That can't happen. There's no such thing as extending the 9180. You can't extend a 3-month visa, okay? The British are exempt from requesting a visa for the 90 days, but that will be coming along possibly next year, where they'll have to actually apply for or pay for the visa. So for the moment, the 9180, you have that to come across to France For 90 days, and every 180 days, you can come with no formality for the moment. If you stay for 90 days, you must leave for 90 days. Then you can come back for 90 days, then you leave for 90 days. However, what I would suggest when people are thinking of coming to France, maybe you're just at the stage where you want to get things out, you're not quite sure. And if you think you might want to extend it, and as you can't, then the alternative would be to maybe apply for a 6-month visa. So if you're thinking you want to come to France and spend time looking for your property, or you're not quite sure yet where you want to stay, then maybe 3 months is not enough, 90 days is not enough. So you want to stay for 4 or 5 months, in which case you can apply for a 6-month visa. So then you're not trapped by that 90-day window. So a 6-month visa, it is not a residency application. It really is just a 6-month tourist visa to be able to come to France, spend a bit more time in France, get used to the area, see where you want to live, maybe look for that dream home, and also you know, look for your main property, and then come back to the UK and apply for them the appropriate visa to live permanently, be that a long stay visitor's visa or some sort of business visa if you want to have a gîte business. I know that's the popular thing for British people, or some type of activity in France. So in short answer, you cannot extend a 90-day visa. What you want to do is plan ahead, and I think Thomas was saying quite clearly with all of our clients, the idea is to speak to you before you come to France so we can discuss what your long-term and short-term objectives are, so you can put the right visa in place at the beginning, because once you're in France, trying to change or modify a visa is very complicated.
Thank you, Tracy. Charles, I'm going to come to you in a second, but I just noticed it's come up because we did mention the mandat to research. So, Joanna, Jay Durling has said, what sort of fee is there for the mandat to research?
There isn't any, it's not an extra charge, it's just a normal agency fee. So if, for example, we find a property through another agency, not through Leggett, it just means that whatever the agency fee is, we just split it between the two agencies. So it's not an extra charge on top. You have to be careful because there are other companies like property finders. Now these are totally different. You have to make sure that they're legal for a start. And what they do is they may charge you a fee of like £2,500 or £3,000 on top of the agency fee. So what they would do is they would work with a lot of agencies and then charge you a property finding search fee, and then the agents would still charge their fee. The agency would still charge their fee because they're totally separate. What we do with the mandat research is there's no fee. It's just part of our service that we will go out and look at other properties, not just our own, or we will look in other areas, not just in our own. So, for example, someone looking in Brittany might change their mind and decide they want the Languedoc. We would then do the same search with the same client in the Languedoc. So we do, you know, it's just like a private client service, but we don't charge for that. It's just the normal, straightforward agency fee. And there is a difference between a mandat de research with us to a property finding company.
Okay, thank you. Charles, let's go to you then. Anne Adamson says, do you have a network of people who can look after holiday homes when they are empty, particularly during the winter?
Yes, we do. This is our property management network. So they would come and do regular checks on the property. We either have like a regular setup fee, either like once a month or once a week, or whether you need some extra service or something particular, we can do like a tailored offer. If you tell us that you need something special, we will offer you that service. There's no problem. And if we cannot do it because we're not, I don't know, capable of doing that particular service that you need, we will find someone to do it. That's our service as well. However, there is also another opportunity that we always recommend our clients to consider, is the short-term rental also in winter. We have guests all year round. Obviously, it's not the same between July and August and November, December, for example, but we do have people traveling across the country, staying for a week and staying for 2 or 3 nights, whether they're here for work, whether they're here for, I don't know, like a romantic weekend, wherever they are, they might need somewhere to stay. There are 95 million tourists every year in France. They're not all coming in summer, and they're not all going in the same place, thank God. So that's why, you know, we need also short-term rentals all across the country, all year round. And the house is always occupied then, but you can still, you know, use it whenever you want, which is the difference between long-term rentals. When it's long-term rentals, it's occupied and you get the rent, but then you can't visit your property. When it's short-term, it's occupied sometimes, it's heated. Bear in mind that, you know, you need to heat your property a little bit, at least a little bit in winter as well, in some areas, whether it's for, you know, against humidity or just to make sure that the house is at least a little bit warm when you arrive. So if people are staying, you get the heating paid for, and it's occupied, so it's safe. So that's why we always recommend to consider short-term rental in winter as well. So that, there you go.
Thank you. Paulette, I've got questions for you, but there's one here that's come up, and as I say, I'd like to respond to people who are actually here with us. Andrew Wilson, you mentioned about the S1, and you said that the person was entitled to receive a UK state pension could apply for an S1. He says, I'm 65 and not entitled to my UK pension until April next year. Can he still apply for an S1?
Oh, that's possibly a little bit more of a question for Tracy than me.
All right.
Yeah,
Tracy,
so effectively, you will be able to request your S1 when you become a retirement age. So if you've moved to France and living in France and you're retiring next year, the year, whatever, in the few years to come, you can apply for your S1. And I'd highly advise that you do that, because it will help you from a social charges perspective when you do your declarations. So yeah, there's no limit on time for that. So long as you apply for it once you're of retirement age in France, you can apply for your S1.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then, Paula, this one was a question that came in advance. Rosemary Harron says, how much should I expect to pay for medical insurance for my first 3 months residence in France? Somebody's very obsessed by 3 months at the moment. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, it's possibly because you can apply for your social security number at 3 months, but you're not going to, as I said earlier, you're not going to have your social security at number 3 at 3 months. AXA France doesn't actually provide an insurance to cover those 3 months when you arrive here. So for that part, we put our insurance broker hat on, and we work with, at the moment, 4 different companies. So what we do is we'll talk to our client and see, you know, are there any medical conditions, pre-existing medical conditions, how old they are, you know, things like that. And then we will decide of those 4 companies which one is actually the most competitive price-wise for what the client wants, which is good. You know, we can look between the 4 companies and take the one that's the best for the client. A little bit of a guide price. One of the best ones that we give, it's a 12-month policy. Some of them, yes, you can cancel once you've got your social security number and things like that, but they're more expensive. So this one is a 12-month policy, but you can't cancel it for the 12 months, but it's 1,500 for the year. So we found for the time it takes for people to actually get the social security number, if they were paying the other ones where it's on a monthly basis and you can cancel it, it's not actually a great deal different, and there's no medical questionnaire for this one. Pre-existing medical conditions are exempt though, and that's something that you need to consider. If you have, you know, a pre-existing medical condition, that is going to be difficult when you first move to France.
Okay, thank you, Paulette. Jonathan, Darius Williams says, if I use a currency broker like yourselves, what guarantees, insurances do you provide that my money is safe?
So the thing to look out for here is segregated accounts. Lumon are authorised by the Financial Conduct Authority as an e-money institution. Now, the FCA covers UK operations. For clients based in the UK, sort of fall into that bracket for the FCA, and clients based all over the world. The regulator is all to do with, say, the FCA, and it's an e-money institution. Now that term basically means that we operate client segregated accounts, and it actually applies exactly the same term to clients based in the EU. I'm sure we're all very familiar with this term, Brexit. The UK left the EU, of course, and this was actually an EU-wide system that was set up. So electronic money institution, any firm looking after client funds, you have to segregate them in a certain way to get this level of approval. So Lumon has it for our EU-based clients through the Bank of Ireland, that's the regulator, and the approval we have from them allows us to operate in any EU country. As I say, for clients outside of the EU, it's the FCA is the regulator. The key point here, it's actually the same principle. Any funds that you've sent to us are held in a segregated client account. So what that actually means in practice is the funds are separate from our normal business funds. If anything was to happen to Lumon, then your money is always kept protected, separate, and it would be returned to you. Now, you know, the chance of such a thing happening, of course, you never quite know what's around the corner with banks and things, but so we turned over 5 billion euros last year. Lumon actually backed by a private equity firm. We're part of a wider group that specialise in financial services companies. So we're very well sort of governed, and there's a bit of extra oversight in terms of how we operate. Yes, clearly, security of funds, a very, very important topic. And if that's a concern that anyone has, and it's a very valid one, it's a very common topic I talk to clients about and giving them the reassurances. And we've got a number of steps we take to manage client money in terms of how we confirm bank details, ensure we've approved ID and certain things in a certain way. But best way to find out more really is a phone call with us. Hopefully some of the benefits I've demonstrated earlier, savings on exchange rates, the wallet function, the gold dust market forecasts. You know, security is obviously a very important part of this as well. We work with all the partners on your screen, see some very big names in terms of wealth management, overseas property transactions. So yeah, if you'd like to learn more, but very happy to have that conversation.
Thanks, Jonathan. Joanna, let's go to you. Catriona Jarvis says, can you explain how the offer and acceptance stage works in France, because it's very different from the UK? How does the binding agreement apply once a price is agreed?
Well, there isn't a binding agreement as such. There's two things that you possibly have to sign. One thing you could sign is an offer d'achat. That basically just means that you sign a letter saying that you've put an offer in and you're a serious buyer, etc., etc. But realistically, that's not probably legally binding, but it just gives the vendor some confidence that you are wanting to purchase the property. So what happens is you make your offer with your agent. The agent makes it with the vendor. If it's all accepted, then the paperwork will start to be drawn up for the compromis de vente. That's known as the exchange of contracts, as it would probably be called in the UK. In the UK, you can exchange and complete on the same day. In France, it doesn't work like that. It's much more like the Scottish system, whereby if all the paperwork's already in and the DPR, which is like the energy reports, and the diagnostics, which is the electric, termites, and all of those reports are done, you could possibly sign a compromis de vente in a few days. Basically, the buyer would always sign first, and then the vendor would sign. Now, the buyer still has 10 days cooling off period. So within those 10 days, if they went home and thought, you know what, we don't want this property, they could still pull out. But once the vendor's signed, they can't pull out. So you don't get the kind of gazumping that you would get in the UK, that, you know, you're just about to complete on a property and you get gazumped. So that doesn't happen. But you'd have, so once the compromis has been signed, you'd have your 10-day cooling off period, and then you'd have to send your 10% deposit to the notaire's holding account. Then after that 10 days, all the searches are done on the property to check there's no outstanding debts, to check that there is, you know, there's no motorways going to be built in the vicinity, and all of the normal searches are done. After that time, then you'd complete. It usually takes a period of about 3 to 4 months to complete. In that time as well, when you sign a compromis de vente, you could put in suspensive clauses. So that could be like, we want permission to change the barn into habitable space. So that would be a suspensive clause. You could be applying for a mortgage. That would be a suspensive clause. All of those could be suspensive clauses, and they have to be met before the final act. If any of those are refused, then you have the right to withdraw from the contract and get your 10% deposit back. If you just decided just before the act you didn't want to purchase the property and you've signed it and it's all gone through, you are likely to lose your deposit, because obviously all the defensive clauses are being met and the only reason you're pulling out is because you've changed your mind. So that compromise on is a legally binding document, and it is, as it would be in the UK, the exchange of contracts, but it's done right at the beginning of the sale.
Joanna, just on that, I mean, I'm obviously conscious of time always, but it follows on. Graham Perrin says, and I don't know if this would be the suspensive clause, how can I protect myself if my UK house sale falls through and I've committed to a French property purchase and paid the deposit? Could that be classed as a suspensive clause?
We, generally speaking, we would never advise that. We would never say put an offer on a French house on the prospect that you're going to sell your house in the UK, because you can't make a French property subject to a sale of a UK property unless the vendor agreed. And if it's a French vendor, they're highly unlikely to agree that, because there is no control over what happens in the UK, and it just doesn't happen. It's the same as you can't, get a UK mortgage to buy a French property. It's exactly the same. So no, you can't rely on the sale of your house. My advice would always be sell your property in the UK, and then you're in a great position to negotiate in France. There are situations where perhaps it's a British vendor that's moving back to the UK and they're happy to wait, but that have to go into the contract, and there'd have to be some sort of date or final date, because it could go on forever. So it's very unlikely. So my advice would always be to make sure you've sold, because you can't really make that subject to a sale in the UK.
Okay, I hope that helps, Graham. Thomas, let's go to you. A number of questions regarding pensions. This one I've pulled out because it sort of covers a few other areas. Can I use my UK private pension to fund the purchase of a French property? And if so, what are the tax implications?
Yes, you can. One of the things you could do, as I sort of alluded to earlier, is you can withdraw 25% of a private pension fund in the UK tax-free. And as I say, it's important, if you're thinking of doing that, it's important to do that while you're still a UK tax resident, because if you do that as a French tax resident, it's not going to be tax-free, it's going to be taxed at the scale rates. So that can help in some cases. That can act as a deposit for a property. Sometimes that's not enough. So what some people can do is, having taken their 25%, they can then move to France, and there is a way that potentially you can draw down the entire fund and pay just 7.5% French tax, subject to certain conditions. So there is a way of getting access to all of your monies within a pension tax efficiently, and then investing the monies in a property. Of course, from a pension perspective, you don't want to do yourself out of income, so we would always advise that you retain enough to be able to invest in whatever way you see fit, in order to provide yourself with an income. And obviously that's an area that we can potentially provide advice on. But in a nutshell, yes, it is possible to use a UK private pension to buy a property, subject to conditions, and as long as you take appropriate advice. It's UK pension advice is a very heavily regulated area, and fortunately, Blevins Franks is in the position to be able to advise people on that.
Thank you, Thomas. Tracy, Rose Mayer wants to know, what type of visa do we need to run a business in France?
So yeah, that's a big question. And again, it's planning ahead is very important when you're thinking about the visas. So what type of visa really depends on what project you have, of course. The most popular business visa I would suggest is a liberal visa, which is an independent activity. So if, for example, you move into France and you want to transfer some skills to France and be independent worker, then a liberal visa could work. Or even if you wanted to have, a gîte business or something like that with your husband, then you could also apply for a liberal visa as well. There is the talents visa, which is also available. A talents visa is a higher level visa, and it goes to a higher level of commission for approval. So it's something I only advise for either large projects where you have to invest a certain amount of money, or for people who have international talents or who are well known internationally. The advantage of the talents visa is the person who has the talents visa, it's a multi-annual visa, so you don't have to renew it every single year, but also your spouse can come along as well and benefit from your visa and be able to work as well. So sometimes we do projects for a whole family where the husband and wife, the husband may come on a talents visa and his wife then gets the benefit, or vice versa, gets the benefit of having that as talents visa and is able to work in France as well. But from a general basis, most people tend to go for the liberal visa because it doesn't go to a higher commission for agreement, and generally speaking, you know, if you do your business and financial plan correctly, provide the correct paperwork at the TLS centre in the UK, that usually goes straight through relatively quickly. And it can be used for any activity really. Liberal visa is not just about, you know, intellectual activities. It can be used for a commercial activity as well. It's called a liberal visa, but it covers all types of activities.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious of time, so I would just reiterate again there that if you do have questions regarding anything to do with moving to France, you've got the details there of all our panelists, and you can contact them directly. There are all their email addresses there in front of you. I'll try and squeeze a couple more in if I can. Charles, over to you. Tony Fuller says, if I use a management firm such as yours to look after my holiday home, what insurances do you have to protect against damage to the property from renters?
Okay, so insurance. Our insurance will not cover the guests if they damage anything in your property. It would be your insurance, and then Paulette could you know, get in touch with you, or you could get in touch with Paulette if you need house insurance that would cover you for such an activity. However, as we say in French, mieux vaut prévenir que guérir, which basically means it's better to prevent than to cure. So what we normally try to do is to avoid any damage, and we put everything in place to avoid that. So I'll try to be quick, but we make the guest sign a contract, like a rental agreement. Then we get a what's it called, security deposit, sorry, which is not withdrawn, so we don't cash it, but we have access to it for 2 or 3 weeks actually after they leave. So even if we only notice something 10 days after, we still have access to that money. If that amount of money is not enough, if they reverse in your wall, then obviously 500 euros is not going to cover the damage. So we ask for proof of travel insurance. French people have it in their home, in their house insurance, so it's not an issue for half of our guests. For the other half, we ask for proof of insurance, and it's written in their contract that if they don't send it, they agree to pay for the damage themselves. So we put everything in place to avoid the damage, and if damage happens, because sometimes it does, even though it's not misuse, like misusing something or whatever could happen, we have things in place as well. I hope I've been as quick as possible. Sorry.
Yeah, that's great. I'll go on to Paulette then. So Paulette, following on from that, if you are letting your home for people to rent, but also using it yourself, is the home insurance policy much greater, or is it very similar, or do you have to pay a sort of dividend on top?
It is a little bit more expensive, but really not a great deal. I would say an average of about 60 euros a year, and that can cover if you've got gîtes. It can also cover if you're doing kind of bed and breakfast and you're providing a meal. It will cover if you give anybody food poisoning as well. So, but yeah, about 60 euros a year. It's not massive.
Okay. And if I may as well, you can have a very good coverage. I'm selling your service now, Paulette, but you can have good coverage that could cover the business part of it as well, which is the for the exploitation. So if a guest ruins your property and then you cannot rent for the next 6 months, then you can get you know, compensated by the insurance.
Yeah, and that's a slightly different policy. That's more if you're, we recommend that if you get an income, you're relying on the income from that property. If you're just letting your house, you know, a couple of times a year, just the 60 euro one. But yes, we can do a specific one that covers loss of income. If you have a water leak, if there's a storm, you know, something happens and you lose that income because you can't rent the property, the policy will cover you. It's a really comprehensive policy.
Okay, thank you both. I've got 1 minute left, and I want to ask this question because I love the fact that somebody is moaning. So Joanna, let's go to you. Paul Williams says, why don't French real estate agents reply back if you are keen on buying one of their listings? Do Leggett's provide a service to avoid this? I've done that in a sort of ranty way. I don't know if Paul would say it like that, but he's very angry.
Yeah,
He's trying
to be honest, you know, there's different agents all across the country. Some are fantastic at service, and you'll always get the odd one that might not be. But you know, as I mentioned before, we do have a sales support team who are on the phone all day long. So usually the calls would come into them, and the first emails would come into them, and our switchboard number goes into them. So you would always be answered. The only time I would say is if you're trying to call an agent directly, they could be out on a visit, and bearing in mind if it's a rural location, they might not even have a signal. So generally speaking, our rule for agents is they get back to you within 24 hours if they're out on the road. You know, and you wouldn't want, if you were out with an agent, you wouldn't want them taking calls all day either. You'd want the, you know, the complete service and be able to ask all your questions of your agent. But we do cover that by having our sales support team who do answer the phones Monday to Saturday all day long, and then the agents, obviously, once you become their client, you'll have their mobile numbers, etc. The best way I would always say is text, because even with myself, if I'm in meetings or things and I get a text, as soon as I get out of that meeting, I'll text back. But you can't always take calls, and it might go on to answer machines. But generally speaking, they should answer and they should get back to you.
I hope that helps, Paul. Obviously, to remind you as well, Paul, that obviously the agents who work for Leggett are, if they don't sell property, they don't earn a living. So you would hope that they would get back to you, because they obviously, their job is to try and sell property because they want to sell property. If not, they wouldn't be an estate agent. So I hope that helps. We'll pass the time as always. I'll let you know that our next webinar is on the 25th of July, but from next Monday, you can start submitting your questions. I know I didn't get to everybody that's asked questions tonight, but as I said before, all the details are there. Joanna's there, Charles there, Jonathan's there, Thomas, Tracy and Paulette, all their details are there. We'll just quickly whiz round to say cheerio from everybody, and I hope you've enjoyed this. And as we said before, this webinar is being recorded, so you can go back and, you know, if you just quite like looking at Charles, I mean, who doesn't? You could just watch Charles for the next 3 or 4 days. It's up to you. Let's say cheerio to Joanna.
Yeah, and I just want to say one thing, Andy. I think what we've forgotten, because we've been talking about all the ins and outs and things that could happen. France is a fantastic place to live, and you know, I've been here 20 years, and I'd highly recommend it. The people are great. It's all about community, and you know, I've never looked back. So let's not forget the fact that France is a great place, and everyone should come. And thanks all for listening.
I think you're right. I think we do worry with these webinars that we do all this, there's paperwork, this, that, and the other. But obviously, if you do get the right advice and help, it can be, you know, it is a fabulous place.
Exactly.
All of us on this panel, except for Jonathan, live here. And Jonathan would live here, but he's not allowed in. That's the reason why he's stuck out in that office. Say cheerio to Thomas.
Yeah, goodbye, everybody. I hope you found the webinar useful, and don't hesitate if you think that Blevins Franks can help with your planning. Get in touch, or if you have any questions, again, please get in touch.
And let's say cheerio from Tracy. She's been here 30 years, so there must be something good about it.
Yeah, exactly. I really, you know, latched onto what Joanna said. There's so much to offer in France, and I travelled quite extensively before moving to France. So if I've stayed here for 30 years, there must be something good about it, and obviously the heat, it helps. So yeah, certainly do reach out if you've got any questions. We've talked about visas tonight, that's what we do, but we also do lots of other things as well, really, to help with a smooth transition. So reach out if we can help in any way. Thanks for everything.
Okay, so cheerio from Paulette.
Hi, thanks for watching and listening. Don't hesitate to get in touch if you need any help or advice with insurance from an English-speaking team.
Thank you, Paulette. And let's say cheerio from Charles.
Bye-bye, bonne soirée, and let us know if you need anything from us. Obviously, we look after your home and we can help you earn money with it, well, your second home.
And finally, from the company that bring these webinars together, it's Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you to all our viewers and panelists. I hope it's been very interesting for everyone watching. And yes, if you'd like to find out more about our exchange rates, how it all works, some of the currency forecasts out there, very, very happy to have a chat. We're genuinely here to look after you and make this whole process a bit smoother and better. So yeah, thank you for watching. And a big thank you to you, of course, Andy, for doing such a wonderful job hosting as always.
Thank you, Jonathan. And obviously, Jonathan's very excited about the gold dust that he keeps waving in front of you. So you just contact Jonathan just to say, what is gold? There it is. There it comes up again. Okay, 25th of July is our next webinar. As I say, you can start submitting your questions from Monday. Obviously, if you submit them in advance, it means that we can get to them because I can get them in advance. I can look at them and select them because obviously I've got to select them for each panel member. We have panel members who actually said nothing at all. So you see, I sort of go round the panel as we do it. Okay, thanks for joining us. Sorry we've overrun as we always do. We'll say bonsoir and we'll see you again soon. Cheerio. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.